Close your eyes. It's Afterimages.
You're listening to Afterimages, a podcast for cinephiles that takes a deep dive into moving images. Each episode features a special guest who is invited to explore a film of their choice. Afterimages is hosted by film writers Frank Bouleg and Marisa C. Hayes.
We couldn't imagine a better guest for this episode than screenwriter and film producer Anne Spielberg, who joins us to discuss her brother's semi-autobiographical film, The Fabelmans. Co-written with Tony Kushner and released in 2022, the film depicts Steven's early life and beginnings as a filmmaker. Sammy Fabelman, his on-screen alter ego, explores the power of the camera, a tool that enables him to process trauma as well as to create joy through the creation of imaginative fictional worlds. Much of the film focuses on the dynamics at work within the Fabelman family, particularly the complex relationship between Sammy's parents, Mitzi and Bert. The film is a reflection about the powers of filmmaking, a coming-of-age drama, and a skeleton key to Steven Spielberg's major themes. The Fabelmans is a must-see to better understand the mind of a man who has helped shape the collective unconscious of the planet during the past 50 years.
Anne Spielberg has developed and sold over 35 projects written for 20th Century Fox, MGM, United Artists, Universal, Warner Brothers, Disney, Paramount, and Amblin Entertainment. She received an Academy Award nomination for Best Writing, a WGA nomination, Saturn Award, People's Choice Award for her film Big, listed as one of the 101 best comedy films of all time. After trips to the Chilean fjords, Alaska, and Antarctica, she became an advocate of the dangers of global warming on the world's glaciers, which led her to write a story for children entitled The Iceberg and the Penguin. She is now in a collaborative process with Pierce Press to get the book published. They are looking at a spring 2027 release. Anne Spielberg, welcome to Afterimages podcast. We're delighted to have you with us today for a discussion of your brother Steven Spielberg's film, The Fabelmans.
Thank you for inviting me to be on this podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
It's an honor, and I thought that maybe we could get started by hearing a little bit about your experience of The Fabelmans. Of course, it's based on the life of your family, and you consulted on the film, as I understand it. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about your involvement and the different roles that you had in preparing the film.
Of course. I got a phone call from my brother, I think in early 2001. And he said, I've written a movie about our lives. And I want you and your sisters, I have Sue and Nancy, my younger sisters. So I want to send it to all of you to read. And if you have any problems with it or comments, or if anything upsets you, I won't do the film. And which was quite a big statement to hear somebody, make that commitment. So the script actually came in the same day, that afternoon, and I read it and I started crying as I was reading it because it was so much. I was looking at my life. So I had no criticisms about it, but he also wanted, feedback with notes from me as a writer. And I had, I've read it a second time before I would give that, and said, I think the third act is a little too long. And, I had one or two places I suggested cutting, one of which he did. But that was really the only note that I had. The thing that astounded me the most was that the film had a secret, something in it that I never had known before. And I found out neither did my sisters, and it was quite a shock. And to think also that Steve had been carrying that secret, and that up until her death, my mother had been carrying that secret for such a long time. He asked us to come on board as consultants, primarily initially with the production designer, Rick Carter, and the art director, Karen O'Hara, and with the costume wardrobe designer, Bridges. Can't remember, it's like Mark Bridges. And so it began a series of emails going constantly every day, because they wanted all the thoughts that we had on remembering what each of our homes were like. Now, we had moved around quite a bit, which you obviously, the story tells you. We had started in New Jersey, had a home there. My father got a job with from RCA to move to Arizona for General Electric. So we moved to Arizona, and then he got a job with IBM in Northern California. So we moved to Northern California, and each of those had a house in it, and they wanted to make it as true to reality, the decorations and the layouts of the house, as possible. So I did sketches of very rough ones, and Steve was also doing this simultaneously, so the input was coming in from my sisters and from Steve and myself. We went through pictures, I had boxes of pictures that I never had put in any order, and I found a picture of the wallpaper in our kitchen in Arizona, and found a picture of the two different dining room tables we had in the kitchen when they were in the kitchen. I found the dishes that my mother had used, the pictures of those. So we started handing all of this over, and Rick and the set designer, in fact, to the point of what records did he have in his room? What books would have been in the living room of my parents' house in New Jersey? What books would have been there? And I remember they had Dr. Spock. And so all of this information was ongoing as they were building the sets. And it turned out that the Northern California, we actually lived in an apartment until we built the house that we were going to live in. And in the movie, they have a rental house in Northern California. So that was quite different, except that it was always dark and gloomy and rainy. And that was very true. Northern California, coming from Arizona, was quite a shock to somebody from the desert to a place where the sun always shined. And it was also a move into an unhappy period in our lives between my parents that was obvious to the children for the first time. What else do we do on it? Well, then Steve started casting, and he called me up and told me who was going to play me. And he says, it's Julia Butters was going to play me. And my character's name was Reggie, which is also my middle name is actually Reggie. So Steve is being very true to, portraying the past. And I was thrilled about Julia because she was such a fantastic actress. And in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think she stole the movie for me. And also that she was so beautiful, and I was this chubby kid at that time and didn't feel very beautiful at all. So I was feeling very up. And the young girl, they got Bertie Boria to play the younger Reggie. Then came in Michelle Williams, and the sets, they had built all the sets in Santa Clarita on a soundstage up there. It was still during COVID. And I remember the first time I went onto the set, which was also the first time I met Michelle and Paul, Michelle Williams and Paul Danos. We all had to be tested. and not just the home test, but the doctor test that you'd get if you had gone to a COVID testing center. Everybody who worked on the film, including the cast and any visitor, and there were very, very few visitors allowed, had to be tested and wait outside for the half hour it took until the results came back. And so after my test, one day, I saw this woman who looked something like my mother. And Steve brought her over to me to introduce me that this was Michelle Williams. And she looked at me with this gaze of warmth as if she was looking at her child. She was really already getting into character. And she asked me questions. We spent time together. We would walk. We'd start taking a walk together. And all of a sudden we started holding hands. And I thought my mom and I always held hands when we took walks, or if we went shopping together, we always held hands. You know, as an adult, we held hands. So I told her about my mom, and the cast was given all photographs and home movies, 8mm movies of our childhood, of our parents, all the movies that Steve had ever taken and the ones my dad had taken on camping trips. They saw everything. Not all the cast saw everything, but Michelle definitely saw everything. And as I watched her, she is such an amazing talent. She incorporated, I started to see my mother inside of her eyes, because the features were not completely similar, but the haircut was, her body was almost completely similar to my mom's. So I told her more about my mother and my experiences at home. And when I met Paul, I first saw him and I thought, I don't think he looks like my dad. And then I saw he was rehearsing a scene. And as he was, this is what I learned about actors, is I've never been one or even try to be one. I saw his body change, and I saw the way his shoulders went and the way his stomach came out a little bit, and the way he was looking at what he was concentrating on. And I suddenly saw my father. So I felt like I had come into a time warp. And I knew him on a set, and this was before we started filming, but already I was started to be taken into the past. And then I spent some time on the set while they were filming. And it was quite emotional. I was there for the scene, the camping scene, when she comes out of her tent, and I had been sitting with Tony Kushner all this time, and I always sat next to him, and we watched it on a video monitor because nobody could get onto the set itself. So except for that scene actually was a night shoot, and so it was an outdoor, the camping scene. And when she did the dance, and this was without music, and she's dancing, and I'm seeing the character Reggie get embarrassed and jump up and start, well, that actually had happened, the dance. So it wasn't just seeing actors be my parents, it was watching scenes from my childhood. And I remember you could see through my mother's nightgown, and I was like, oh my God, what's she going to do?
This is so gripping. May I just jump in and ask, did that sometimes feel cathartic? Or I can imagine how emotional this experience must have been. I think so many of us are haunted by our childhood homes that sort of reappear in our dreams or all of our childhood memories. What did it feel like coming back to certain types of furniture or wallpaper and then reliving certain memories that had really happened?
It was like there was something in time had been suspended, and I wasn't really living in my present anymore.
Mm.
I was when I had the car take me to the set, and I was when I was going home from the set. But when I was on the set, I wasn't sure where I was.
Mm.
The whole experience was cathartic in a way that it brought my parents, who both had passed away, it brought them back to me. And I started calling Michelle Mom.
Mm.
And she accepted it.
Mm.
And I started to get close to Julia Butters. And I actually gave her my high school ring, which was the high school that in Northern California, where I got the ring, as a gift to her, which she also could wear if she wanted in the film. When we first met, she and I just looked at each other and we hugged. And for her, it was a strange experience to be playing a living person and actually to meet that person. We've stayed close friends since, and also with Bertie, who played the young Reggie. She and I have stayed close friends, and we go out to lunch and we go out to dinner. Julia and I have our dinners alone, and Bertie, I go out with her and the family because, she's still not driving. She's just starting sixth grade now, but I've been watching them grow up.
Mm.
And it opened this whole new, experience of I became like an aunt
Mm.
to both of them.
Mm.
But what I find personally fascinating is the fact that it's a deeply personal story, but that because of the way, or thanks to the way it's told, it becomes universal. That it transcends just your family, and it touches people around the world. And at the same time, it's a story about Steven becoming a filmmaker, while it is also a story about your family as a group. I was wondering, in your opinion, what it might be about this story that touches people. What is it about the experiences that you had during your childhood that might lead people to enjoy the film?
Interesting question, because I think I had asked the same question too. Who would be interested in somebody else's childhood?
Mm.
But it was much. It was more than that. It was a story of an evolution of two different relationships. The evolution of a relationship between my mother and my father, a father and a mother,
Mm.
between a love story that was going to eventually, that was a beautiful love story, but we didn't know
Mm.
as children that it was a love story. And to see a young man find himself and find who he was and know who he was so early in life and commit to that step. So when I watch films about families, I love character-driven and family films, family-driven films. I find them fascinating, regardless of who they're supposed to be about.
Mm.
And whether they're autobiographical in any way or whether they're entirely fiction. And I think that there is an audience for that who also like to see, whether it's a comedy, even if you look at something like The Godfather, it's a family
Mm.
story,
Mm.
so you want to see it.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
And there's this secret at the heart of the story also that you've mentioned, which is brought to the level of consciousness thanks to the camera and the editing. Can you tell us a little bit about this process of revelation that the camera plays in the film?
The young man shoots everything. Yeah, he lives behind a camera. Uh, for I think many reasons. One is that he wants to be a filmmaker, and I think one in that it's a way for him to somewhat distance himself from anything that he doesn't want to emotionally deal with. And so in the story, Sammy's putting together a camping trip film for his father, for his mother after her mother dies. And he had the old-fashioned editing machines. It's actually the most powerful scene in the movie, and it's about 3 or 4 minutes long, and it's done silently to a piece of music that just haunts me, which is Bach's concerto in D minor and at the Adagio. That Mitzi is playing on the piano in the living room while Sammy is editing the camping film. And you have the small reels when you edit, and you do it by hand, the splicing by hand. And he starts seeing things as he's putting it together that cause him to pause. At first, it's no big deal. He sees his mother and Benny, his father's, their friend, walking together. And then they go behind a tree, and then they come out again, and suddenly they're holding hands, and they're not holding hands, but it passes. Then he sees something else happening where she sees a look in his mother's eyes when she's looking at Benny, when they're playing a game, the three of them, the three adults, of, fall back, who can catch me first? And he sees this look in her eyes, and it makes him go back. Something's happening. And in the meantime, the music is playing, and it's reaching a crescendo as he is editing this and reaching a crescendo of seeing again something that he didn't really catch in his own mind, that his mother put her arms around Benny, and seeing that there was love and a sense of longing going on between the two of them, which is a punch in the gut, because Benny has been in the family at dinner every Friday night. Benny was his father's friend and worked with his father at the same company. Benny wasn't like an uncle, a favorite uncle who was also part of the family. And you can imagine life without Benny, but what was really going on was that Mitzi was in love with Benny, and Benny was in love with Mitzi. And this was the first time that was revealed to Sammy and to the audience. And it knocked him off of his chair, literally, as the music comes to an end. And he's staring straight ahead, and she takes her hands off the keyboard in the other room, and she's staring straight ahead. And there's also a sense in her of loss from her mother and longing.
There's such vulnerability in this film in terms of really opening up this story. And I'm wondering about the role of COVID in that, because you mentioned the fact that creating the film did happen during the pandemic and that you had a fairly closed set as a result. And I'm curious to know if COVID really sparked something. It was a time when a lot of people took moments to kind of reassess their life, to think about what they really wanted to focus on and to do. And I'm curious if that played a role in really bringing this film to fruition.
Yeah, I'm sure it did, because this was something that Steve had talked to Tony about briefly just started telling him bits of his life story back in about 2004 while they were doing Munich, while they were in Budapest, filming parts of Munich there. And I was on the set there too. And then later during West Side Story, they talked about it some more, and Tony had said, you really should make this movie. I think Tony became like Steven's shrink. Steve was talking more and more. And as they were finishing West Side Story, and I think COVID began after, yes, it would have been after that. I know Steve felt that, he didn't have another project, and if he was ever going to write the story, and he had been thinking about writing a story, and for a lot of reasons had not, partly because he didn't know how my parents would react to how they would be portrayed, if it was an honest portrayal of how he saw them. So Tony and Steve decided, during COVID to write it, and they did it via Zoom. And they actually, during West Side Story, Tony was keeping a notebook and of all the things they had talked about. So they wrote it during COVID, and there was that sense of that isolation you had during COVID brought you into yourself a lot, because you were distanced from everybody, except for Zoom or telephone, or the people that you were stuck in the house with for all that time.
Yes.
Everybody was distanced, which was an interesting time to go into an inner place. And I think that you had the space and the time to really examine yourself a lot. Then the writing of the screenplay, which Tony was doing the typing. And I think they worked about 3 times or 4 times a week on Zoom. Made them totally focus on this as a project, and decide that this was going to be Steve's next directing project as well. And Tony had never collaborated before, but it was a good collaboration. And Tony also, this is sort of going forward a bit, but he's a stickler because he's a playwright. He's a stickler for the dialogue being what it is on the page. And there were times that he would get up from his chair as soon as the scene ended, because the kids would be always changing their dialogue into more modern vernacular, not into the 60s, dialogue at the time. And he'd have to go up there and talk to them about sticking to the script.
But this idea of concerning the writing, I find very interesting, because it seems to me that Steven writes with images, whereas you, being a scriptwriter, you write with words. And if I'm correct, and I was wondering,
not quite.
and I was wondering, to what extent do you, when you write something, do you write in a visual style? I mean, how much of the visual element of the writing do you leave to the directors, and how much do you keep for yourself?
I direct it when I write it. It's very, very visual. It's a really good read. I'm not a sparse writer. I do a lot of description and a lot through dialogue of that. So I see it. I see it in my mind's eye. I see the character, and it's never an actor, but I have a vague image of the character, especially once the character takes over from, and when I write something, I do my first 15 to 30 pages. I rewrite them over and over again, up to 40 times.
Oh, wow.
I've had, and until it is absolutely right. The first 30 pages before I can move on have to be, I know everybody, and I have their voices, and their voices are no longer something I have to try to pull down. They're incorporated in me. and they each are their own voice, and then it streams, and then it starts to move. I'm a very slow starter because of that, but I'm a very fast finisher.
And often your writing is combined with producing. And do you feel that that is helpful in further like taking that visualization to the next step? Is that kind of a natural pairing for you?
Well, in the case of Big, Gary and I were co-producers, but that in many cases does not necessarily give you much power to influence the film. And because you have a director, and who is usually well, if he hasn't written it, it's the auteur. And the writers very often are not on the set of a movie. So the director will make changes to the script, the actors will make changes to the script, the producer will make changes, the studio will make changes. On Big, Jim Brooks had a feeling for his company, which was called Gracie Films, and it's the one we sold the script to 24 hours after we gave it to our agent.
Wow.
She sent it to him right away, and he bought it, had the studio buy it right away. He was a writer before he became a director, and he was first and foremost a writer. And his first feature, he was not allowed, that he wrote, he was not allowed on the set.
No.
And it became a movie that he was not happy with. And he vowed that writers should not have to go through that. So he gave us leave to be on the set every single day of the shoot, and to also have a voice. And we talked to Penny after every scene, and we had sometimes notes. She got fed up with us eventually, but not until like the last 2 weeks of production. So we were there for almost everything except for a couple of scenes. And being able to write, change things if we needed to, as we found out that something didn't work with the location that we had to choose. If a location changed and we had to change something, if it seemed that there was too much space, in between dialogue and it needed something, we were there to put that in, but they're right on the spot. So I feel very blessed and actually it spoiled me too, because that experience is something that very few writers get unless they're also the director, which is why more writers are wanting to direct their films. For myself, I'm a director when I write, but I am too frightened to become a director in reality. I don't know if it's because there's already one in the family who needs a second one. It's not a sense of feeling like I couldn't direct because of the shadow. So I don't think I know enough. I never went to film school, and I was not a cinephile as I was growing up. I was much more of a reader than I was a moviegoer. I went to a lot of movies, and Steve and I saw a lot of movies, and we'd in fact react them out at times. And especially if he wanted to scare us, he would, reenact something from a scary movie. So being a producer does not give you the same power that being a director or writer-director does.
To come back to the Fabelmans, and to the role of the camera, of the editing, I have the feeling that Steven took control of his personal story thanks to filmmaking with the Fabelmans. Is this something that you would agree with, that he was trying somehow to control again or to process something which he had experienced?
I think that is true, although he had written it as well. So he wasn't a director filming somebody else's material. He had control from the inside and outside of it. And I was very interested that he had this insight into himself. And I don't know, at what age he got this insight that the camera was something that was not just because it was a love of making movies, but it was a shield. It was a way to maintain a distance, if anything, or control, some kind of control, especially if you're a child or a teenager, over what is going on around you. And if you can control that, you don't have to feel if it's painful. Like the scene at the divorce scene in the Fabelmans, which is a very difficult scene for me to see. And even though I've seen it many, many times now, I don't know if everybody catches it, but there's suddenly Sammy is sitting on the steps listening to his parents talk about how they're divorcing, and his sisters are crying, and he's watching. But suddenly there's a shot where he appears in the mirror in the den with the camera filming what's going on around him, filming his parents talking about the divorce. And that's Sammy's projection into how he is handling hearing this news. Although I feel that he knew it was going to happen. His sisters did not know it was going to happen, but I think that he was aware that this was eventually going to happen. But it was still painful, and it was a way of, like he did when he was a child and crashed the trains and filmed it because he needed to control something that was frightening and have a distance from it, that it's like having a magic screen. So you don't have to feel pain too deeply. But at the same time, I also feel that he was seeing how he would film this. If he was, the director had been born, been born some years before that, and was coming out, and how would he direct this how would he film this if he was making a movie about it? So I think the two things were happening simultaneously.
Do you remember what it was like watching the completed film versus observing on set as the project took shape? Could you maybe tell us a little bit about how you and your family viewed the final film? Was there a private screening that you attended first, and what were your responses?
Steve wanted my sisters and me to see the film before anybody else, before any kind of a screening at all. He was going to show up. My sisters both live on the East Coast. One's in New York and one's in Washington, D.C. And so he was going to show it, and I was going to fly to New York, and he was going to show it to the three of us together, just the three of us. I got COVID. and I couldn't make it. So they had a screening, and Steve came into the room after the screening to talk to them about it. He screened it for me at his screening room at Amblin, but he didn't want me to see it alone. So he had his longest term assistant, who is like a member of my family now. She's been working with him for about 30 years or so, watched the movie with me. And she hadn't seen it either. And she also knew my parents. She bought a box of tissues into the screening room. So it was just the two of us in the screening room. And as soon as it began, and I saw my parents on the screen, my father kneeling down, explaining how film, moving pictures work. It's a series of photographs that are, when they move very fast and pass a light. That was my father. And I burst into tears. I started crying from the very beginning. So I'm getting emotional now. I was in tears a lot watching the film, and also having memory flashbacks, because when he made the Western movie, I was in the stagecoach, and and he recreated that. They actually had my jewelry, junk jewelry, but still it was my jewelry, which they stole, and they lost it in the desert when they were running, the bad guys, running away from the good guy. And when he was wrapping young Reggie in the mummy, I was the one he wrapped as the mummy. So I'm seeing flashbacks really happening to me at the age that they were happening. But when it came to scenes like Sammy's discovery of that came as such a shock to me when he discovered that. And then at the end of the film, before the divorce scene, there's a scene where Paul Bert picks up Mitzi. They're going to see the new house that he had built. And he wants to carry her over the threshold. And Sammy, it's all Sammy's filming it. It's all point of view. And her eyes, I could see them change as she was coming closer to the camera. That a sense of, if I move here, I'm lost forever. And which was just so remarkable, such remarkable acting. And then when I got to the divorce scene, I was crying again. So by the time the film was over, I was sobbing. I wasn't upset that the movie had been made or anything. It was that I had had an experience that nobody else could have with that film. And then Steve wanted to talk to me right afterwards and so I'm babbling to him about it, and I'm crying. There was a lot of crying on the set. Steve shed tears a lot while he was directing this movie. And his mom would come over and hug him. And everybody would, it was very close-knit family feeling of everybody was experiencing this together.
You just mentioned the look in Mitzi's eyes when they arrived to the house in California. There's something which I find very interesting in the film. It's the way, as I mentioned, that the camera is used to take control of things. And it ends with a sequence with John Ford, who tells a young Steven Spielberg that somehow he can reframe reality, that he's in control of how things are going to be given to the audience.
Oh, is that what he meant? Thank you for explaining. But that's you're absolutely right.
That's what I understood anyway.
I mean, I understood it from a technical angle and from a visual angle, but I didn't understand it till you just said what that actually was. It was a reframing of reality.
That's the feeling I had anyway when I watched it, and I had the feeling, and I don't know if you will agree with me, that Steven, to a certain extent, is not the only one directing the film. What I mean by this is that Bert reframes the reality of the family several times by moving westward, that he is also something of a director for the story because of his professional life, until the point that you've mentioned when Mitzi realizes that this is not necessarily what she wants in California, and all of a sudden she takes over as a director of sorts. She reframes the story according to her own wishes. Would you agree with this? Do you think it's close to...
In that respect, it would be Mitzi coming to find the person who she really is. And she is very different than Bert in that he's very much a in control, scientific oriented engineer who is married to an artist who is somewhat of a sprite, and a little bit Tinkerbellish too, who is capable of having a kind of fun that Bert can't let go of himself to have that.
Mm.
So Mitzi had, contained, except for when she plays piano and is interacting with her fun side, she had contained that side and suppressed that side.
Mm.
And Bert, my dad, as the head of the family and the breadwinner, and somebody who wanted to be a success and loved the field he was in, adored the field he was in,
Mm.
Of computers and transistors and circuitry and how machinery works, how things are made.
Mm.
Very opposite personalities. And in looking at it as if he's the director of the film or of our lives, yes, in a way he was, because he made the decisions and my mother would have to go along with the decision. I think the decision to move to Northern California was a catalyst of, especially since Benny couldn't come this time. And that I don't think Bert ever suspected anything, but I think he felt that he wanted to take control. Again, his career was really moving forward, and that he was sort of asserting himself in some respect over this friendship. And he needed his family to be together, even if he was at work all the time.
Yeah. The feeling we have is that he's doing all this out of love. It's not the necessity to control, but really that he's trying to give.
Exactly, and that's true. And he was somebody who felt responsibility to his family and to his children, to his children's futures, in so much as what they should be when they grow up and what they should be doing now in order to prepare themselves for who they will be when they grow up. And he always felt that Sammy, and in a bit all of us, should come over to his side, to the science side. I was a middle, I'm not a middle child. I'm the second child. Steve's the oldest, and I'm 3 years younger than him. And then my sisters are 4 years and 7 years younger. And I was the quiet one in the house. I was the observer without a camera. So I saw quite a few things too. And I was the peacemaker. And I was terrified of the idea of my parents getting a divorce, because that was a bad word. In those days, that was a bad word. I never knew anybody, any friends or kids who had parents who were divorced. So if they ever fought, I would make signs and write notes to them and slip them under the door saying, make up and be friends, make up and love each other. I was an advocate for that. And I could not see, like my brother, unfortunately or fortunately for him, saw the reality of what was happening. Bernie to me was like an uncle who was in my life. And the three of them, my parents and Bernie, they were a threesome. And I think that in some ways the threesome supported the strength of the marriage. And that without that third party, Mitzi lost something of what she had that kept her going, that recognized that part of her that she had suppressed and was able to bring out again.
In the film, yes, Benny feels like a mediator between the two of them.
Yes. Yeah. If not a mediator, then the person they could both talk through
Yes.
in a way, because he had something in common with both of them. He was also an engineer and working with Bert, and he was the playful spider under the plate, you know, and he did do that. I mean, he was always pulling gags on us that you'd find things in your room that you hadn't expected, and or you suddenly would have a gift given to you. Sort of, he was serendipity. And they went out every Saturday, the three of them together, and left us alone to do things like become mummies and put stuff in closets. You know, all those things were done, and play dentist, you know.
And when the film leaves off, Steven's career is just beginning. He'll soon go on to make an episode of Columbo that I absolutely love. But with you, you're a young, burgeoning writer, I imagine. Can you fill in the blanks for us and tell us a little bit about how you became a writer? And we can move into perhaps talking a little bit more about you and your projects.
I love talking about Steve. He's a fun topic for me.
You're welcome to say as much as you like. We're happy to hear it.
I was why I was a reader, very much a reader. I had wanted to be a writer when I was a very young girl. I wrote some, but I didn't do it. But I read about it. And then my favorite book was Little Women. And I identified with Joe, who was going to be a writer. And because I had my own room, my sisters shared, and my room was my sanctuary, as Steve's was his sanctuary. You know, with Steve, you didn't go in unless you were invited. With me, my sisters would burst in there and I'd have to kick them out. I didn't start actively pursuing getting into the film industry until I was in late high. Well, I started working with Steve on Amblin, on his short film, during the summer vacation, and I got really interested in his filmmaking and wanting to be a part of it. I did the camera reports. I typed the script. He dictated part of it, and I was one of the few people who could read his handwriting. And then I did continuity on the set, and I met a lot of people at the time who he was hanging out with and beginning to hang out with, of Tony Bill, who was a mentor. I met Norman Lear, who eventually gave me a job, and I became a reader for him and Bud Yorkin at Tandem Production, and reading scripts. And Tony, in my summer vacations from Arizona, I'd come to California to stay with my father in the summer. So I was living with him in that apartment that they have in the Fabelmans, in that place, after Steve moved out and moved on to the college campus and was making films down there. I moved into my dad's place, and I met some people, and I wrote some things for somebody who wanted to make a short film but never made the short film. The actuality of my really writing was I worked as a low budget producer on 10 science fiction films for a small independent company that were supposedly, and I think they have been distributed for like late night TV. So I ended up producing, and they said, do you want to write one of them? Because the two partners who owned this company, it was very small. They wrote all of the films themselves and directed all the films themselves. But they said, do you want to write one? And I got paid $2,000 to write it. And I wrote a comedy about a space guy who goes through a time warp and comes back to Earth invisible and has to try to find a way to keep his wife from marrying the guy who sent him into the time warp, the astronaut, and try to get himself to be known. I just realized that's another father who has disappeared on his family.
Another time warp too.
Yes. Some of these themes run in many areas that you don't even recognize until later. When I did that and I was casting for it, I got a call from an agent wanting to know who my agent was, and I didn't have one. And he was a young agent just starting out. So when this contract was up on the producing, I started going out with him, and I was just writing outlines and treatments and stuff, and realized that this one script was not going to be enough. I'm going to have to write another spec script. I couldn't sell an outline. At that point, I had I wrote a second script about a bag lady in New York and a young man whose parents had died, and he has to find out who his real mother is in order to inherit the money, and he finds out that she's a bag lady. I gave that script to a friend of mine named Susan Merzbach, who was working at Fox, not as a submission, but as I was involved with women in film, and it was a friend in the industry to read it. And she gave it to an agent over at ICM who wanted to sign me, and who subsequently moved to CAA, and I went with her. And within 2 to 3 months after signing with her, I sold one of my treatments to Tom Mankiewicz at Warner Brothers, and I got hired to do a rewrite for John Davis at Fox, 20th Century Fox. And then sort of started moving on from there. I did several films before. I've written about 30 to 35 or adapted books, original and screenplays, and sometimes the producers or the studio came to me with an idea, and I would work on a development deal. The only one that was made was Big, but I was able to make a living for 30 years as a screenwriter. I did one of the Amazing Stories episodes, and it's funny, just had a podcast that's going to come out talking about that episode.
Oh, great.
And then so now I sort of semi-retired. I'd written a script that I felt was the best thing that I had ever done, and gave it to my agents, who gavelled, they loved it, and this is wonderful. It was 14 years ago or 15 years ago, and they sent it out and got beautiful no's back, because it was about women, and it was about older women, and it was about getting old. And nobody wanted to make a movie about women. There was 3 generations of women, and it was about aging, and it wasn't about Botox or anything. It was about aging. It was about mortality. So actually, just 2 years ago, I decided, then my heart was broken when they said they're not going to send it out anymore. I should go and write something very commercial. And I couldn't come up with something very commercial, because I'm more, like I said, a character driven, I should be more in the independent film world, but I'd already worked, for 35 years in the studio system, which were not doing those kinds of films. But I went back to CAA about a year and a half ago, and pretending this was a new script, I called my old agent, and I had retired basically, and was not writing, except for writing a children's book that will come out, and I'll tell you about that later. And I went back to CAA, and they said, that they would be happy to handle this project, helping to package it. So I now have a producer on it, and we're out looking for directors.
Wonderful.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
We'll see if anything happens with it. And
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
so I had a nice rest. And was able to do gardening, and I collected miniatures and did dioramas and stuff like that for a while.
Fantastic. That's really exciting and really proof of perseverance, I think, and how things shift in the industry as well. Maybe you are just
Hmm.
too ahead of your time with that theme. And now
Maybe so.
I hope people are ready for it now because we surely need it. Mhm.
I think people will be ready if we can get it produced. The indie world, to get things made now, it's very hard.
Yeah.
It's very difficult time.
Another thing that we need to be talking more about, I think, is global warming. And I think this is actually
Yes.
something that is at the heart of your project concerning the children's book you just mentioned.
Yes. I'm quite well, we could say an advocate of global warming. Is that the wrong way to put it? But of
Mhm.
climate change. I've visited Antarctica and I visited Alaska 3 times.
Mm.
And I did a cruise through the Chilean fjords and seen glaciers calving. And my different trips to Alaska, I saw the glaciers that I had seen before slowly disappearing.
Mm.
And in taking flights to London, when I was doing more traveling, it often took the northern route and it flew over Greenland, and I saw Greenland change
Mm.
under me. And I looked at it every time, and I saw more and more and more land and less and less and less ice. And when I was on the Chilean cruise, the fjords, which are beautiful, we saw a glacier calf, and it was quite a big calving. They made quite a wave that the boat, we sort of had to do a turnaround.
Mm.
And I watched the icebergs, and there was one that was moving fairly fast on the wave. It was a little iceberg, and I thought, where is he going? And he passed the boat, he passed right by me. And I thought, it's a lot of ice. This is just, too much ice. But I got this feel for this one particular iceberg and sort of gave him a life as I saw him go. And I said, I don't think he wants to leave home. All the other ice is still up close to the glacier. And then later I went to the Falkland Islands and I met my first penguins and I fell in love with them. A group of them tried to untie my shoelaces. And I came up with a line in my mind all of a sudden, especially with watching the iceberg. I said, I think the iceberg was born too soon. And then a line came in my mind saying, once there was a little iceberg that was born too soon because he wasn't ready to be born. And I started putting that together into a story. And eventually had it almost the whole story in my head before I wrote it down. Getting to put your hands on the computer, to start typing is always the writer's worst enemy. It's that it's right here, it's all in your mind, but get it on paper, get it on paper. So it took me a while, but I finally put it all down on paper and I wrote this story that was about an iceberg that was born too soon. That there are always glaciers and icebergs are always going to be born because that's the cycle of their lives. But let's not have them be born too soon. This is a story of an iceberg and his relationship with the penguin. And I can read you a little part of it if you want.
We'd love to hear it. And if I'm not mistaken, the title is The Iceberg and the Penguin.
And the
That's
penguin,
correct.
yes,
And
that's
it's going
correct.
to come out next year. And we have the honor of hearing a sample before the book becomes available to the public.
I've never read a book out loud before, but this will give me practice for when I have to sell it. Okay, so about the publisher's Pierce Press. Once there was a little iceberg that was born too soon. Before it was born, it was part of a glacier. The glacier lived by the sea in Antarctica at the very bottom of the world. It had lived there for thousands of years. The little iceberg lived in the middle of the glacier. It had a hole on the top of its head. Thousands of penguins made their home on the glacier, and one year a pair of penguins made their nest in the hole on top of the little iceberg. The little iceberg was very excited because it had never been the home of the penguin family. The mother penguin laid one egg, and they waited for their chick to hatch. The little iceberg waited too. One night, the glacier started talking to itself. It growled and groaned and rumbled and creaked. Yes, the glacier was talking, but the little iceberg didn't listen. It only wanted to listen to the penguin egg as it began to hatch. It listened as the chick was born. It listened to him eat, and it listened to him play. And it listened to the beat of the baby penguin's heart when he slept against its ice every night. It was the most wonderful sound in the world. If the little iceberg had listened to the glacier talk, this is what it would have heard. Warm, warmer. The oceans of the earth are getting warmer. One day, the young penguin ran to the little iceberg. He had learned how to swim. As the little iceberg rejoiced with his friend, the glacier suddenly gave a great roar louder than thunder. All the penguins on the glacier raced away from the sea, and before the little iceberg could understand what was happening, it felt a gigantic pull, and all the ice in front of it disappeared. For a moment, the little iceberg was suspended over the water. It had never seen the sea before. Then a monstrous wave rose up in the air where millions of tons of glacier ice had fallen. As the wave approached, the little iceberg felt a crack behind it, and then there was nothing behind it at all. Jump off, cried the little iceberg to the penguin, but the penguin didn't jump, and together they fell down onto the great wave. The wave lifted them up and carried them away from Antarctica and into the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The little iceberg and the penguin were all alone, and they began to drift. They drifted north, they drifted west. Days went by, weeks. In the morning, they watched the sun rise. At night, they counted the stars. When they were feeling lost, they would sing to each other or listen to the music of the whales. The sun and water became warmer as they drifted towards the equator. As the penguin grew larger, the iceberg got smaller. It was melting. And that's all I'll give.
Thank you very much for sharing this with us. The book will have illustrations as well?
Oh, yes. Daniel Fior. It's doing, we have all the sketches are in, and he's painting them as we speak. And we're doing watercolors.
What a beautiful story.
Right.
Thank you for that extract. We really appreciate it. It's so touching to hear these stories that really bring people close to the landscape and give life and personality to these places that may feel far away for so many, but are so essential and important to understand.
And also to write stories like this for children, because they are the ones who will have to deal with the consequences of what we've done and unfortunately what we're still doing with the climate.
Yes.
So
yes.
Thank you so
That's
much.
true. That's true. Thank you.
So we like to close the podcast by asking our guest if there's a question you wish we had asked but haven't asked.
And you're not obligated to.
Yes. The only question I thought that you were going to ask was why Steve made, and how many movies has he made where a family breakup has been a part of it before he actually got around to writing a film about his own family divorce. And I had looked into that the other day. And I have a list of films that have a broken home or in its center as a part of it, as a part of them becoming the film they are. So can I read this?
Of course, yeah.
So there's E.T., where Elliot's father has left his mom. Close Encounters is the family falling apart. Empire of the Sun is James loses his parents, is separated from them because of the Japanese invasion of Shanghai. AI, the mother abandons her robot son in the woods. The Minority Report. Tom Cruise's character was kidnapped, and that brought about a divorce with his wife. Catch Me If You Can. It's the teenage Frank deals with his parents' divorce. It was a very bitter divorce. War of the Worlds is a divorced father who is estranged from his kids. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is a father and son. Sean Connery and Harrison have a relationship that's been estranged for a number of many years. And that has been sort of a running theme in not all, definitely not all, but a lot of Steve's films. And the Fabelmans sort of took it out from under the pillow and brought it into being.
Yeah.
No, it's very interesting.
To really confront it once and for all.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating to see the role that the Fabelmans plays as a key to understand the rest of the filmography of your brother. I mean, you really understand so much better the themes and the motifs of his work after having seen the Fabelmans. So it was wonderful that he had the opportunity to shoot this movie.
Yes, yes. And it made us all so much closer than we've been. You know, we were with him at the Toronto screening, which was the premiere, the Toronto Film Festival, and at the AFI premiere. And he had introduced us, my sisters and I, to the audience and had us brought up on stage. And we've done interviews about the film and how it's changed our lives. And the communication, because when you're an adult and your siblings, you drift, you have your own families, and there's still the sibling bond, but it's more in memory than in action. And then after the death of our parents, there's just 4 of us left, and it took the Fabelmans actually to make us vow to be this as close as we had been as children, and even closer now. I feel closer to my siblings. I feel closer to Steve, and vice versa, than we ever have in many, many years because of the Fabelmans. So it was a gift.
And I would argue that we all feel closer to you thanks to the movie. No, I mean, it really brought us closer to Steven, to his world, and to the family, and really created a bond that goes beyond his filmography. So it was really a gift for all of us.
Thanks. I think so too.
You've been very generous, Anne. I think that might be a beautiful note to conclude on, even though I have the feeling we could chat with you for hours. It's so wonderful to hear you, but perhaps we'll conclude there. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking to both of you.
Thank you for listening to Afterimages. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and follow Afterimages podcast on social media.